My beloved child. A single sentence changed the atmosphere yesterday, and strangely, it was not spoken loudly. It came out almost casually, in the middle of a conversation that was supposed to be ordinary, but the moment those words landed, the third party stopped looking at him the same way. She had expected reassurance. She had expected him to say something that would make her feel secure about where she stood. Instead, he said something about you, something so simple, so sincere, that she immediately understood there was a part of his heart she had never been able to reach. And that was when the argument began. Don't skip, because the most important part is not that they fought. It is what he said moments before everything changed. He did not compare appearances. He did not talk about status, attention, or anything superficial. His words went somewhere deeper. He said, "You don't understand. They're different. Being around them feels like a gift." And for several seconds, there was nothing but silence. Not because the sentence was dramatic, but because it revealed far more than he intended. She heard something underneath those words: respect. Appreciation. A connection he could not easily explain. And suddenly, all the little moments she had ignored began making sense. Here is where yesterday became unexpectedly revealing. She asked him what he meant by a gift. He could have changed the subject. He could have softened his answer. He could have pretended the words meant nothing. But he didn't. His expression shifted, almost as though he had finally become tired of hiding something even from himself. It isn't about what they give me, he said quietly. It's about who I become when I think about them. That answer changed the entire conversation. Stay till the end, because there is a reason those particular words mattered so much. The third party had been looking at this connection as though affection were something that could be won through effort, attention, or competition. But he was describing something entirely different. He was describing the feeling of being understood without having to perform. The feeling of remembering who you are when someone enters your thoughts. And maybe this is the part that will speak directly to you. Sometimes your deepest impact on another person is not created by trying harder. Sometimes it comes from the quiet way you made them feel seen. You may never have noticed it. You may have wondered whether your kindness disappeared into silence. But meaningful moments have a strange way of staying with people long after the conversation ends. Then came the question she probably wished she had never asked. So what exactly makes them so special to you? This time, he didn't answer immediately. And that pause said almost as much as the words that followed. Something important is waiting for you, because he began remembering details. Small ones. Things most people would overlook. A conversation where you listened instead of interrupting. A moment when you remained calm instead of trying to prove yourself. The way you carried yourself when nobody was giving you recognition. He remembered something you once said that stayed in his mind far longer than you could have imagined. And as he spoke, she realized this wasn't a passing fascination built on one exciting moment. You had become connected in his mind to something peaceful, authentic, and difficult to replace. That realization was what caused her emotions to rise. She challenged him. She wanted him to explain why he kept returning to thoughts of you when he was supposed to be focused somewhere else. And his response was quieter than everything that had come before, because I tried not to. Those 4 words completely changed the meaning of yesterday's disagreement. He had tried to dismiss the connection. Tried to become busy enough that the feeling would eventually fade into the background. Tried to convince himself that distance could simplify everything. Yet something kept bringing the memory back, not magically, not because of some impossible force, but because certain people become associated with a version of ourselves we genuinely value. You had somehow become that reminder for him. And this is where the third party finally understood what she had been fighting against. It wasn't you competing with her. You weren't even in that room. It was his own clarity becoming harder to ignore. Think about that for a moment. Sometimes the strongest presence is not the person speaking the loudest. It is the person who is absent from the room and still somehow becomes the center of the conversation. But then yesterday took one more turn. She became quiet. Completely quiet. And instead of continuing the argument, she asked him one final question. If they really mean that much to you, why haven't you told them? He looked away. For the first time, he had no immediate answer. Because that question touched the one part of this story he had been avoiding. His feelings were not the only thing he had kept hidden. There was something he wanted to say to you, something connected to why he called your presence a gift in the first place. He had almost said it before. More than once. But every time the opportunity came, he pulled back, not because the words were unimportant, but because saying them would make everything real. And somewhere inside that silence, yesterday's argument stopped being about the third party at all. It became about a choice he knew he could not postpone forever. A choice between continuing to hide behind uncertainty, or finally allowing you to know what your presence had actually meant to him. What happened after she asked that final question is where the story changes again, because he did something neither of them expected, and it may explain why this conversation was never really about losing control. It was about a truth becoming too clear to keep hidden. The room became strangely still when he reached for his phone, because nobody expected his next move to be connected to you. He didn't unlock it immediately. He simply held it for a moment, staring at the screen as though one decision could change the direction of everything he had been avoiding. The third party noticed. Of course she noticed. After everything he had just admitted, after calling your presence a gift, after confessing that he had tried and failed to push thoughts of you aside, this small movement suddenly carried enormous meaning. She asked him, "What are you doing?" He didn't answer. And that silence was different from the others. It wasn't confusion anymore. It felt like clarity arriving slowly. Don't skip, because what happened next revealed why yesterday's argument had reached such an emotional turning point. He opened something connected to you. Not because he wanted to create drama, and not because he wanted to prove anything to her. He opened it because he needed to remind himself of one detail he had never explained. Something you had said. Something ordinary on the surface, yet somehow unforgettable to him. And when he saw those words again, his expression softened in a way she immediately recognized. She wasn't watching someone caught in a temporary fascination. She was watching someone remember exactly why another person had become meaningful to him. Then she asked the question that pushed everything deeper, "What do they have that I don't?" He looked up immediately, almost surprised by the question, because in his mind this had never been a competition. "That's not what this is," he said. She wanted a clearer answer, but he refused to reduce human connection to a list of qualities. He wasn't saying you were perfect. He wasn't pretending you had never misunderstood each other. In fact, the opposite seemed closer to the truth. What stayed with him was that the connection had felt real even when it wasn't perfect. There had been moments of uncertainty. Pauses. Things left unsaid. Perhaps even distance. Yet beneath all of it, he remembered a sense of sincerity that he had struggled to find elsewhere. Stay till the end, because this is where the word gift finally began to reveal its deeper meaning. He wasn't talking about receiving something from you. He was talking about discovering something within himself because of you. Around the thought of you, he remembered the person he wanted to be, more patient, more honest, less interested in pretending everything was fine when it wasn't. And there are some realizations you cannot force yourself to forget once you have recognized them. But suddenly, the third party stopped arguing. Her voice lowered. She looked at him and said, "Then maybe you've already made your choice." He immediately responded, "I haven't made anything." Yet even he seemed to hear the weakness in that answer. Because choices are not always announced. Sometimes they appear first in where your attention keeps returning. In whose words you remember. In whose absence you notice. In the conversation you keep replaying when nobody else knows you are thinking about it. And yesterday, he had finally been confronted with all of those things at once. The third party wasn't simply upset because your name had entered the conversation. She was reacting to the realization that your name had apparently been present in his thoughts long before yesterday. That distinction mattered. She had believed this was something new. Something temporary. Something she could wait out. But when he began recalling tiny details about you, details he had never intentionally memorized, she understood that the story had roots she hadn't seen. And here is the detail almost nobody would have expected. He defended you without attacking her. When emotions rose again and she began questioning your intentions, he could have joined in. He could have used uncertainty as an excuse to diminish what you meant. Instead, he calmly said, "Don't make them into someone they're not." That sentence stopped her. He wasn't asking her to admire you. He wasn't demanding that she understand. He was simply unwilling to let frustration rewrite the person he believed you to be. Something important is waiting for you, because immediately afterward, she asked, "Why are you protecting them when they aren't even here?" His answer came faster this time. Because being absent doesn't make it okay to be unfair to someone. And there it was again, that quiet respect. Not fantasy. Not exaggeration. Respect. The kind that survives even when the person receiving it cannot hear it. For a moment, everything softened. She sat down. He put the phone beside him. Neither seemed interested in winning the argument anymore. And strangely, that was when the most meaningful conversation began. She admitted that she had noticed him changing whenever your name appeared. Not dramatically. Just enough. His attention sharpened. His tone became more careful. Sometimes he became quiet afterward, almost reflective. She had noticed it for longer than he realized. And finally she said something that made him look directly at her, "You're not confused about them. You're afraid of what happens if they matter as much as you think they do." He didn't disagree. That silence revealed what his words had been circling around all evening. Maybe his biggest hesitation was never deciding whether you mattered. Maybe it was wondering what would happen if he finally admitted it to you. What if you had moved forward? What if you interpreted his silence as indifference? What if too much time had passed? Those questions had kept him frozen between knowing and acting. But yesterday changed something. For the first time, another person had spoken his hidden hesitation aloud, and once something private becomes visible, it becomes much harder to hide behind uncertainty. Then his phone lit up. His eyes dropped toward the screen. And his entire expression changed. The third party noticed immediately and asked, "Is that them?" He didn't answer. But he picked up the phone. There was something on that screen connected to you, something small enough that another person might have ignored it, yet meaningful enough to make him stand up and walk toward the other side of the room. He looked at it twice. Then a third time. And suddenly the conversation from minutes earlier, the argument, the questions, the word gift, his hesitation seemed to be leading toward one unavoidable moment. Because this time, instead of closing the screen and putting the phone away, his fingers moved toward the message box. He began typing. Then stopped. Deleted everything. Started again. And what he finally decided he wanted to tell you was not what the third party expected at all. What happened next was almost too quiet to notice, yet it became the most revealing moment of the entire evening. His fingers remained above the screen, but this time he wasn't struggling to find impressive words. He was trying to find honest ones. That difference mattered. The third party watched from across the room, no longer interrupting, because something had shifted in him. The argument had stripped away the excuses he had been using to keep his feelings neatly contained. And now, with your name sitting there on his screen, he was facing a question he could no longer answer with silence. If you truly felt like a gift in his life, why had he spent so much time making you wonder whether you mattered at all? Don't skip, because his realization wasn't that he needed to make some dramatic declaration. It was simpler, deeper, and perhaps more meaningful than that. He realized he owed you clarity. Not promises he wasn't ready to make. Not beautiful sentences designed to impress you. Just honesty. And so he typed something that began with a line he had wanted to say for longer than anyone knew: "There's something I should have told you much earlier." His thumb hovered over the screen. He didn't send it. Not yet. Instead, he read those words again, and suddenly memories began moving through his mind, not like a perfect romantic story, but like scattered pieces finally forming one picture. He remembered a moment when you could have judged him but chose to understand. He remembered a conversation that seemed small to you but stayed with him afterward. He remembered the strange calm that sometimes appeared simply because you were there. And perhaps most unexpectedly, he remembered your distance. That was the part he had misunderstood. Somewhere along the way, when you stopped reaching in the same way, he had assumed you no longer cared. Yet yesterday's argument forced him to consider another possibility: maybe you had simply grown tired of being the only one showing courage. Stay till the end, because that thought landed differently. What if your quietness had never been rejection? What if it had been self-respect? What if you had stepped back because you needed actions to meet words, rather than continuing to interpret mixed signals? He couldn't know exactly what you felt without asking you, and for the first time, he understood that guessing had become the very thing keeping him stuck. Across the room, the third party finally spoke again. Her tone had changed completely. "If you're going to message them," she said, "at least know why you're doing it." He looked at her, surprised. Minutes earlier she had been challenging everything about this connection. Now she was asking him to confront it properly. And perhaps that is what yesterday was really doing to both of them. It was replacing assumptions with uncomfortable clarity. He asked what she meant. Her answer came slowly, "Don't reach out just because we argued. Reach out because you actually have something honest to say." He looked back at the unfinished message. She was right. Contacting you in the heat of an emotional moment would be easy. Being intentional would require something more. So he deleted the sentence again. Not because he had changed his mind about you, but because he finally understood that you deserved something better than words created from temporary emotion. Then came the realization that changed his entire approach. He had spent so much time wondering whether you would welcome him back into conversation that he had forgotten something important. Reaching out did not have to mean demanding an answer. He could simply tell the truth and leave you free to decide what you wanted to do with it. Something important is waiting for you, because this was the first time yesterday that his thoughts stopped revolving around his own uncertainty and began considering your experience. How had his silence looked from your side? How many times might you have questioned whether the connection meant anything to him? How often had he expected you to understand feelings he had never clearly expressed? He leaned back and quietly said, almost to himself, "Maybe I made them carry questions I should have answered." The third party heard him, but she didn't respond. There was nothing to argue with anymore. A few minutes passed. Then he began typing again. This time, slowly. No grand promises. No exaggerated confession. He wrote that he had been thinking about a conversation between you. He admitted that he had handled some things poorly. He said there were things he appreciated about you that he had never properly expressed. And then he reached the sentence that made him stop again, "You made me feel like I didn't have to pretend." He stared at those words. That was it. That was what "gift" had meant when he said it during the argument. It wasn't about perfection. It wasn't about you rescuing him or completing something missing inside him. It was about authenticity. Around you, he had experienced moments where he felt less pressure to perform, impress, or become whatever someone expected. And because that feeling was rare to him, losing access to it had made him finally recognize its value. But just when it seemed he was ready to send the message, the third party asked one last question. "And if they don't respond the way you hope?" His hand became still. This was the fear underneath everything. Not simply rejection, but discovering that while he had been quietly realizing your importance, you might have been learning how to live peacefully without waiting for him. For several seconds, he said nothing. Then he gave an answer she clearly hadn't expected. "Then I respect that." No argument. No attempt to control the outcome. Just acceptance. Because something had matured inside him during that difficult conversation. If his feelings were truly based on respect, then your freedom had to matter too. He could offer honesty. He could not demand what happened afterward. And strangely, that answer changed the third party as well. The tension left her expression. Maybe she finally realized she had been trying to compete with something that was never hers to defeat. Human connection cannot be forced into a contest where somebody wins and somebody loses. Sometimes people simply discover what fits their hearts, and sometimes they discover it later than they wish they had. She stood up, looked at him, and said quietly, "Then send it when you're sure you mean every word." And she walked away from the conversation. He remained there alone. Your name was still on the screen. The message was still unfinished. But now there was no argument surrounding him, no one pushing him toward you, and no one pulling him away. Whatever happened next would be his decision alone. He read the message from beginning to end. Changed one sentence. Removed another. Then added 7 words at the bottom that transformed everything he had written above them. Because those 7 words revealed what he actually wanted from you now, and when he finally placed his thumb over send, something happened that made him stop one final time.